We're constantly told these days to follow the science, believe in science. The science will guide us. The science will save us. All hail science, our redeemer. This is a message we have heard, especially during the COVID lockdowns, which have been justified on the basis of science. And by on the basis of science, I mean on the basis of the word itself. This is usually how science is wielded in arguments these days. In order to prove that science is on one side, one need only shout the words science and research and evidence while providing actual examples of none of them. Like, do your research. Haven't you ever heard of science, you dummy? Look at the evidence. And that's all. That's the whole argument. Loud and confident assertion in the place of persuasion, which pretty much sums up all debate on the internet these days and much of what you get from the left in this country. The left is especially fond of talking about science, though not necessarily as fond of the thing itself. Yesterday on the show, just as an example, I played a strange little skit from the demented mayor of Chicago celebrating science, ostensibly. And it's really not necessary that I play it again, but I'm going to anyway, just to torture you. And so here it is.
Thank God. Science is back, baby. And the earth is round, not flat.
Washing your hands does work. Social distancing does matter. And wearing a face covering does help protect all of us. I do love science.
Yes, you're welcome for that. Don't tick me off or I might keep playing that. That will be my punishment for the audience anytime it misbehaves. The Lori Lightfoot videos will continue until morale improves. But in any case, you see there's science. Science is back. And of course, Governor Cuomo in New York is a big fan of talking about science. He said that following science is the reason why he's decided to, as we discussed yesterday, take the absurdly unconstitutional step of telling people how many family members they're allowed to have in their own homes. What this has to do with science and how science at all vindicates this move is not explained. It's never explained. And it's interesting that from the follow science and believe in science crowd, you also get this. Abigail Shrier wrote a book called Irreversible Damage, The Transgender Craze Seducing Our Daughters. And it's about, as the title suggests, left-wing gender ideology and how it's being imposed on our children. Here's a description of the book on Amazon. I think it's important to understand what the book is about so that the madness of what we're going to discuss next is perfectly clear. So the description says, until just a few years ago, gender dysphoria, severe discomfort in one's biological sex, was vanishingly rare. It was typically found in less than 0.01% of the population, emerged in early childhood, and afflicted males almost exclusively. But today, whole groups of female friends in colleges, high schools, and even middle schools across the country are coming out as transgender. These are girls who had never experienced any discomfort in their biological sex until they heard a coming out story from a speaker at a school assembly or discovered the internet community of trans influencers. Unsuspecting parents are awakening to find their daughters enthralled to hip trans YouTube stars and gender-affirming educators and therapists who push life-changing interventions on young girls, including medically unnecessary double mastectomies and puberty blockers that can cause permanent infertility. Abigail Shrier, a writer for the Wall Street Journal, has dug deep into the trans epidemic, talking to the girls, their agonized parents, and the counselors and doctors who enable gender transitions, as well as to detransitioners, young women who bitterly regret what they've done to themselves. Coming out as transgender immediately boosts these girls' social status, Shrier finds. But once they take the first steps of transition, it's not easy to walk back. She offers urgently needed advice about how parents can protect their daughters. Okay, sounds like a great book, an important book. I'd heard of the book before, hadn't read it. I've now ordered a copy of it myself. But the more important point is that it's a book talking about a very real phenomenon and calling attention to a problem that many people would prefer to ignore. It's also a book, it would seem, grounded in science. That is, grounded in the recognition of the reality of biological sex and child psychology. It is through the recognition of these two realities and through understanding them that a person can see that the transgender craze among children is a problem. It's a crisis, in fact. But the pro-science people don't like this kind of science. So the woke squad has been hounding Shrier and trying to get her shut down and censored and going after anyone who sells the books. Yesterday, a couple of trans activists and it was just a couple from what I could tell, tweeted at Target complaining that the forbidden text was on sale in their stores. Target, within hours, very quickly responded and pulled the book from their shelves. All it took was a few trans activists just shouting the word transphobia, and Target, a multi-billion-dollar company, caved in like a quaking sinkhole and apologized and said they'd remove it, just like that. It must be nice to wield that kind of cultural power. I mean, trans people say they're oppressed by our society, and yet just one or two of them can go to Target and say, I don't much care for this product you're selling. And the whole company will fall to its knees, beg for forgiveness, remove whatever item was distressing them. Do you think I could get that response? Do you think I, as the dreaded, privileged, cisgender white man, could go to Target and say, hey, Target, get rid of this book here. I don't like it. And they would actually say, yes, sir, as you wish. I doubt it. Now, once I'm fascist dictator of the hemisphere, you can be damn sure they'll listen. But for now, not so much. Because I'm not so lucky as to be oppressed in that way. In the way that so many groups in America are, quote unquote, oppressed. By the way, as mentioned, there's been a lot of censorship around this book. And of course, this issue more broadly. This week also, GoFundMe shut down a fundraiser by a group of parents who were trying to raise money to put up billboards that were supposed to combat the manipulation and corruption of children by the radical LGBT left. The billboard said, puberty is not a medical condition. And then there was a picture of Schreyer's book and a message urging people to read it. GoFundMe stopped the fundraiser, citing their rules against hate speech. And this is what you get if you follow the science in the way that the left wants you to. Namely, they want you to follow not the science, but doctrine. And they want you to follow it all the way over a cliff and into the abyss. See, the thing is, following science, I mean actually following science, if the phrase means anything at all, must mean simply weighing all the information available, analyzing it coolly and rationally, and making informed judgments. Science, after all, is not some sort of creature. It's not some entity. It's not some mysterious being that commands our allegiance. Science is the study of the physical and natural world. And following science means not blindly accepting whatever someone tells you in the supposed name of science, but rather approaching issues as objectively as possible and drawing conclusions based on an honest analysis of the available information. It'd probably be better to say, instead of follow the science, as if the science is some homogeneous, never-changing thing which issues decrees like the Wizard and the Wizard of Oz. Instead, maybe we should say, think scientifically. Or maybe even better, putting the word science to the side, we might just tell people to be honest, to be rational, be thoughtful. That's really what's needed in our society. But whether we're endeavoring to follow the science, think scientifically, or simply be honest and rational, none of that is possible if entire categories of thought are forbidden, if volumes of research and evidence on a given subject are thrown in the incinerator because they might offend the wrong people, if perfectly valid and intelligent points of view are not allowed to be expressed or are shouted down rather than listened to and engaged with. I mean, if you really want to follow the science and you don't agree with Schreier or people like her, then present your arguments against her. Make your case. Say, I disagree. Here's why. You'll have quite a hard row in front of you if you want to make an argument against Schreier's view that we shouldn't push gender confusion on our children. But if that's your view, defend it. The problem is that most of the people with that view, the opposing view to Schreier's, know they can't defend it. They can't begin to make a coherent case. So they scream and shout and pout and punish and censor. Of course, all the while, still extolling the virtues of, quote unquote, science. Well, I hope you enjoyed that clip from the Matt Walsh Show. If you did, go ahead and hit that subscribe button right down there so you can stay up to date on all of our future content.